I'm Moshe, and I'm autistic.
I'm Leah, and I'm boring. Welcome to the Now You Know One Autistic podcast.
The opinions expressed in this podcast reflect one autistic and one Leah, and don't necessarily reflect the entire autistic community.
Let's get to it.
Hi, Leah.
Hi, Moshe.
How are you?
I'm okay.
It's so wonderful to be back yet again after a couple of weeks.
I mean, we're sort of back. So I should ask you, how are you? Because you're not doing amazingly.
No.
You're not doing terrible, but
No,
I'm doing amazingly.
I'm not, dying or anything. But, I mean, my health hasn't been, phenomenal. But I'm doing okay. Today, I've been having some breathing issues. Mm-hmm. But,
due to other unforeseen circumstances, you couldn't get one of the medications you need, so you're having trouble with attention. But you've been doing really well with that.
Yeah. Oh, that too.
Well, I'm sure it's hard for you, but you've been outwardly doing okay with it.
Yeah. Due to circumstances outside of our control, I haven't been on my ADHD meds for, a few days.
Yeah, it's like 3 days or so.
Yeah. And there's a bright spot on the horizon, but we just haven't gotten a chance to fill it. So we're doing a show today where I guess you get to experience
unfiltered us.
Unfiltered us.
We're trying a different format because there was something that came up the other night. Not even last night, but 2 nights ago. This is how little time we have. We didn't even have time to discuss a discussion that we wanted to have. And I wanted to discuss it with you, and I thought it would make a great topic. So I figured let's just cut out the middleman. Instead of discussing it and then formatting it into a show, let's just discuss it.
Right. I mean, the podcast did start originally based off of just discussions that we used to have about our lives together and our experiences. And we were like, we should do a podcast about this.
So what you're going to hear is one of our raw discussions, meaning, I ask Moshe questions based on my desire to understand the way his brain works, and then I'm able to support him better. He does the same for me, by the way. It does work in reverse. I don't want to paint it that it's just a one-way street, but...
No, of course. We are going to try and get back to a little bit more of a formatted show, the way that it was. The way that it were, that'll be edited.
I mean, different shows will do different things. We'll have some really cool guests lined up, and some of them will be more formatted, but I think this conversational format will be very good for people because they'll get to see sort of behind the curtain as to how hard we really do have to work to communicate, even though we both speak the same language.
Right. So
actually, we both speak multiple of the same languages to each other.
Pretty much. So we started the show way back in the middle of last year. Last year? Was it last year?
We started it the summertime. I don't know, maybe 6 months.
Was it 6 months?
Maybe.
Well, it's last year in terms of the Jewish New Year, but it's still obviously in mid-2024. If you're still listening to this in 2024, it's mid-2024. So when I say last year, I don't mean last year. I mean last year as far as the lunar calendar goes, which probably doesn't mean a whole lot, but there you go. And when we first started, we really had a plan to focus quite a lot on communication because that seems to be the underlying thread of the majority of our discussions. So we're back to sort of, if you will, the old style format where we're talking about communicating about communication.
Mm-hmm. So what came up the other night, I don't even remember what the context of it was, but we disagreed on something. So when we disagree, and it's not instantly resolved, which we're getting better at, and when it escalates, let's say, I don't want to say a fight, but sometimes we do fight, you'll often say this thing to me that I actually never understood. You'll say, well, now I have to start from zero. And I would often say to you, you're not starting from zero with me. All the good things that you've ever done still count. This is just a disagreement. But you were insistent that you had to start from zero. And it turns out that you revealed to me that what you were talking about really was your self-esteem. So you're measuring your self-esteem in a different way than a lot of people do, based on your ability to not disagree with the people in your life and the ability to sort of please everyone or be a good boy, I guess, if you want to say it that way, to everyone. And especially me, I'm very centric to that process. And apparently you're tracking that, which was interesting to me because I have all of that stuff preloaded. First of all, I don't measure my self-esteem based on my performance toward other people. And I don't feel the need to track it. So would you like to tell me more about that?
Sure. So when Leah and I first started our relationship, like not our original relationship, obviously, because we've known each other for like 30 odd years, but our romantic relationship, if you will, there was a lot of development that I had to do to get to where I'm at today. And it was putting in place the building blocks in order to understand, because we really did have to start from scratch, because I had a very difficult childhood and a very difficult teenagehood and a very difficult early adulthood. And in general, it was very much about I needed to learn how to be social. I needed to learn how to communicate my needs. I needed to learn that the issues that are going on in my head are not always coming across to other people. So I had to learn what I had to do in order to communicate properly with not just Leah, but other people. And then I got to a place where I had put in place everything that I felt that I needed in order to be the kind of person that I knew that I wanted to be. So I sort of set a standard for myself that I wanted to maintain. And the closer I got to maintaining that standard, the better I felt about myself, because rather than not being aware of my actions, I'm now fully aware of my actions and the consequences that they can cause based on my behavior.
Describe what that standard is.
So in general, I had to do a lot of, some people use the term soul searching, but for me, it was more in depth than that, because I had to define what I wanted out of life. And if I was willing to take on all of the responsibilities that I thought I was, or if they were just, I think we use the term fleeting fancies. And so over the years, we really sort of worked on developing what that consisted of.
Yes, and some things did go by the wayside. Some things that you thought you wanted were not what you wanted, and we had to put them aside, let's say.
We did, because we had to decide what things would be conducive for us to do the things that we wanted to do, or specifically the things that I wanted to do. So we are currently speaking to you from Israel. We weren't always here. We were originally in Canada, as we've talked about before in past episodes. And so we had to make the decision at some point to move to Israel. Now, I don't know if it's something that I've spoken about a lot. Mostly, I don't think I have, because it doesn't have a lot to do with neurodiversity, but just a bit of a insight into, me as a person. I've been discussing moving to the Middle East on and off since I was a teenager. And I would have this idea in my head that this is something I wanted to do. And it wasn't really based on too many concrete facts. It was mostly just something that I felt like I was driven to do. My upbringing was in large part with my mother, but my father's family most of them actually live here now in Israel. But my father's family was very pro-Israel.
Sometimes that is the only driving factor that you need, but you have to determine if it's reasonable or not. You were brought up in a scenario where you needed to prove evidence for everything. Because you had a wealthy family, because your family had a certain social stature in the Jewish community of Montreal, you couldn't just say, I want to do something, because you had to have a reason. So if you said you wanted to be a doctor or a lawyer, everybody would have gotten that. But if you said, I want to move to Israel, you'd have to have really concrete reasons. And sometimes, because my heart moves me is a good enough reason for people, because it makes me happy is a good enough reason for people, but that was never allowed to be your reason.
Right. Now, you see it a lot in the movies and books and whatever, that people will just get this inclination in their mind and then they'll like go backpacking through Eastern Asia or something. But I wasn't allowed to do that because even though my mother and my father, and actually my grandparents, except from on my father's side, but my mother and my father and my mother's parents and my father's father were born in Canada. But my father's mother and all of my great-grandparents on my mother's side were from Eastern Europe. So they came to Canada from Poland and Lithuania and Hungary and going back generations and generations and generations. So my mother was raised by her parents, who in turn were raised by immigrants.
Right. Immigrants don't have time for fleeting fancies. Immigrants don't want to hear about that. They want to know how you're going to make money, live, reproduce, and let them die peacefully. Essentially, immigrant parents are that way.
So my great-grandparents, Joseph and Sadie were their American names, or Canadian names, I guess, were my mother's grandparents on her father's side. And Joshua and Tilly were her Canadian names, were their Canadian names on her mother's side. And they were, like Tilly and Joshua and Joseph and Sadie, came from Poland and Lithuania and Hungary. And they made a decision. Like they decided when they were leaving Eastern Europe that they were going to come to Canada. And they were fleeing a variety of things. The Holocaust was happening around that time. Things were going awry in Europe in general, with the pogroms in Russia and the anti-Semitism in Eastern Europe. So they raised their children with this idea that we left a place of lacking and not having enough rights, or not having enough food, or not having enough opportunity to come to this land of plenty, which was Canada and to a certain extent the States. So when I started talking about, I'd really like to move to Israel, my initial reaction, especially when I was younger, was, why would you ever want to go there?
Right, because for our listeners who don't know, Israel is still a country that's currently being built up. It's not an easy life. It's not like North America where everything's already settled for you and there's no conflict, and it is a land of plenty. Like, life here is good, don't get me wrong, but it's just not the same. It's clearly a young country that's being built up. So if you're already fatigued from war and tired and, for generations of lacking, if you have the choice in front of you, I'm not sure that I wouldn't have made that same choice, to be honest.
I mean, it was an idea for me.
It feels like a frontier, whereas North America's already built up.
It is. Even today, it's still a frontier, and especially back in the 70s and 80s, and even going into the 90s, Israel was still very much a country, they're called kibbutzim, where if you were coming from away from Israel, you would generally start off on one of the communal farms.
Yeah.
And you would plant, and you would reap, and you would be a farmer, and you would be a herder, and you would develop the land. You would cut down trees. You would, aquify the soil. You would basically do your part to grow, in every sense of the word, the state of Israel.
Right. And our ancestors didn't want to do that after suffering in Poland. They wanted to open a business and have an easy life. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that.
Right. And my grandfather owned a really successful business in a very metropolitan area of Montreal. And he was like, why would you ever want to go from this wonderful, city of Montreal to, picking dates in the middle of the desert? It just doesn't make sense.
I mean, some people want to pick dates, but anyway, I don't know how we got on this subject. We were talking about self-esteem. So you wanted to move to Israel and people didn't let you. I think that ties back into the self-esteem.
Right. And that's kind of where I'm going.
Right.
I'm taking a bit of the long way, but what it amounted to was I wanted to go to Israel. At the time, my first aspirations actually started in the late 80s, early 90s. We had this yearly I guess, hike or whatever, to like walk around the city called the March to Jerusalem, because I went to a Hebrew day school. And I would always say, I think I would like to do the real March to Jerusalem. And they were like, no, you don't know what you're talking about. And I always came
True, you
across,
weren't exactly the kind of kid who you could picture working, like picking oranges for a living.
yeah, I mean, we live in Jerusalem now, and it's the second decade, I guess, of the 2000s. Jerusalem is, for the most part, a very built-up city. A lot of cities in Israel are. There are still like kibbutzes, but it's not the norm. A lot of cities in Israel are huge, bustling communities of millions of people. Well, at least 1 million people. I don't know.
I mean, yeah, we went to Tel Aviv a couple of weeks ago, and it was really busy even for us. We were not used to that anymore.
But when you're talking about the Israel of the 70s and 80s, you're thinking of, I mean, your mother
My mom
was here.
and she loved it, and she worked on a farm, and she worked. She said when she got back, first of all, when she was here, she dehydrated several times and she was sick.
Right.
And she had to put mineral pellets in her water just to keep her going. And then when she got back, I think she weighed like 119 pounds and she was brown from head to toe. Like she worked.
Well, I mean, she was a very hard worker. Still is, to a certain extent. But how this ties back into self-esteem for me was I always had this aspiration of wanting to move to Israel. And that was kind of my core thing. And I don't know if you know anything about autism or whatever, but it was a hyper focus. I would talk about Israel. I'd go to Israel. Whenever I would visit my grandmother, my father's mother, we would talk about Israel all the time. She would tell me about all the stories about how they went to Israel in the, early parts of the 40s and 50s, soon after independence, and, saw the communities that were devastated by the Independence War and the 6-Day War and the Yom Kippur War. So that was the Israel that they told me, and they spoke of a place of bravery and heroism and people who fought to get what they wanted. Whereas my mother saw it as a place of war and terrorism. And my father was never really a big fan of Israel, and my mother was never really a big fan of Israel. So it wasn't really something that they took seriously. So they're like, yeah, whatever. Tell me another one.
But there's a hyper focus and then there's a hyper focus. Autistics in general, I find, get what you would consider a hyper focus a lot. But there are some hyper focuses that are core to the person. So for example, Avram with art, he's never not going to be focused on art.
No, of course.
Another person that we know, I won't mention by name, with technology, he's never not going to be able to, pull apart machine parts and build them. For you, it was literally religion and the Israel thing was your core thing. But how could people separate that from your extreme interest in rodents and dogs and animals and, I don't know, video games to a certain extent, that you would hyper-focus with the same intensity, but then sort of, whatever, they'd go away one day. So why would they think that this interest wouldn't necessarily go away one day, or that you wouldn't get off the plane and be like, yeah, no?
Well, and that's exactly it. I wasn't exactly somebody who, stuck to a couple of things that were really important to me, and that's it. I kind of ended up as a jack of all trades. I tried this, I tried that. It didn't work out. When I was younger, I wanted to be a cardiologist, and then I wanted to be a teacher. And they're like, here he goes again, talking about this thing.
I mean, you would have been a good teacher. It just
And,
didn't work out, like, educationally wise for you.
but I also had a hard time, like, moving forward on what I wanted to do, which again, people can't be faulted for hearing this guy talking about moving to the Middle East all the time and then just not doing it.
Right.
Like clearly he doesn't really want to go that much. But I knew that I wanted to. I just didn't know how to make it happen. And anytime I asked how to make it happen, I was told not to.
So how does that roll into self-esteem, though? Or what self-esteem looks like for you? Because it turns out self-esteem, much like a lot of other things for you, are on analog. They're not actually preloaded and automatic.
Right. Because unfortunately, because I wasn't given any survival skills to the extent that I needed to when I was younger, I had these desires in my mind, whether they were to move to Israel or whether they were to, be observant in my faith, or whether they were to be a teacher or, take up music. I always wanted to learn how to play the piano. But the thing is, I knew that I wanted to do something. I just didn't know how to make it happen. And I was surrounded by people for a long time that were very discouraging, with you being an exception and other people were. So whether it was too difficult for them, or they didn't have the time, or they didn't have the patience, or it just involved a lot of, extra steps that my mind, being that it was what it was like, this seems very complicated. Maybe it's not worth doing. And I still struggle with the whole, I want to do it. It's important to me, but it requires me to do something, and that's a lot. And I hate that. That's the one part of me that I resent and that I'm fighting against, is it's too hard.
Right. You still do that.
Yes.
And sometimes for really simple things, but I guess just sort of gathering the steps or whatever.
But you had to learn that about me. You had to learn that when I said I wanted to do something and then I didn't do it, it didn't mean that I didn't actually want to do it all the time. It meant that I didn't know how to get started.
You and I have a lot of flow charts, actually, now that I think about it. So when you want to do something, it now has to pass a flow chart. The first thing is, do I want to do it? And if I don't want to do it, then it goes to, am I willing to do it for you? And then if it doesn't pass those two things, we just toss it out anyway.
Exactly.
But then if it passes one of those, then we say, well, why do you want to do it? How long term are we going to do it? How much work is it going to be for you? And then how much extra work and splashback is that going to be for me, when you inevitably can't necessarily organize yourself? There's a huge flow chart of things before we decide that we're going to do a thing. Because as Moshe expressed, he used to just throw spaghetti at a wall and see what sticks. Today I want to buy a new dog. I'm going to go buy a new dog. And then no idea how to walk them or take care of them, or how he's going to pay for vet bills, for example. So now everything has to sort of pass a flow chart.
Right. So kind of getting back on topic a little bit, for me, it was, once I had put aside all of these, all this layer of crap that was in my head about things that people told me that I wanted, told me that I liked, told me that I needed to do, and sort of dug all the way to the bottom back to where I was still there. We had to figure out what are things that you want? What are things that you like? What are things that make you happy? And I had to get to the point where I decided that it was very important for me to be with you. And when it was clear that you also wanted to be with me, years and years and years later, I then had to switch to, how am I going to make this work? Because, again, much like with Israel and with learning a musical instrument or other things, I knew what I wanted. I just didn't know how to do the things that made it possible.
Yeah, because I was, in Moshe's words, very difficult. Meaning, in realistic terms, I was just a normal, regular woman in my 40s who wanted normal, regular woman things.
Right.
That somebody who's grown up wants. And the reason why that was such a shock for him is because other people in his life before that were really low-hanging fruit.
Unfortunately.
By design. It's not their fault. By design, you seeked out people who were easy or simple or didn't care very much, so you didn't have to perform very much.
So I wanted to be with you. And much like learning a musical instrument, I couldn't just sit down at a piano and play. Some autistics have that. I unfortunately was not born with that super talent. I was born with a love of flags and other useless traits. But the thing that it occurred very quickly to me was that I absolutely wanted to be in a relationship with you, but I didn't know how. I didn't know how to share. I didn't know how to compromise. I didn't know how to allow my interests to once in a while take a backseat to what you wanted. Because if you weren't doing what I wanted all the time, then you didn't care about me. If you weren't listening to everything that I told you, then you didn't care about me. And I really started from a position of what oftentimes people in GAN or in the early or kindergarten or the early parts of elementary school struggle with. Okay, now it's your turn. Now you have to, now you need to stop talking and let them talk. No, they want to play with your toys It doesn't mean that you don't get to play with your toys later, but now
Mm-hmm.
you get to play their games. You get to play with their toys.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the whole idea that I wasn't invalidated as a human being because you wanted to go to a restaurant that you liked, or that you wanted to do something that you were interested in, or that you wanted to talk about something that you needed to talk about. If I wasn't the focus of every aspect of our life, and you weren't doing exactly what I say, then you clearly didn't care about me. And that is exactly where I started. And obviously that was not conducive to any kind of healthy relationship. So both of us had to decide if it was worth putting in clearly lots of work to get to where I understood what was expected of me in the kind of relationship that, as you say, a regular person would be in with a partner. And back to the whole concept of self-esteem, if that's something that I was willing to put in the work for. Because honestly, I don't want to fault anyone who, maybe they try dating or maybe they don't. And they decide, you know what, I just want to play video games all day, or I just want to draw all day, or I just want to do my thing and I don't want to share.
That's each person's, decision. Nobody has to do anything they don't want to do, especially once they're an adult. Kids sometimes have to do stuff they don't want to do, like go to school and whatever. But especially once they're an adult. But that definitely was a thing that happened very early on and very often earlier on, a lot less now. For me going, do you really even, is this okay? Is all these changes you're making okay? Is this too hard? Do you even want to do this?
Right.
And it was a genuine question. It wasn't like a manipulation, do you even want me? It was, do you even, I see how hard this is. Do you even want this? Let's backpedal for a second.
Because one of the things that makes our relationship unique, and that makes actually this podcast unique, is because we weren't two people that just kind of got together and we had to put in a little bit of work understanding each other.
If I'm being honest, and don't take this for anything but the love it is, if I just had met you in our 40s, we wouldn't have made it.
Exactly. Because we did have that history, and you did know me from the before times. And I had a lot of crap that were piled on top of me, a lot of bad habits that had been baked into my personality. And you really kind of had to chip away at all the bad stuff to get down to the person that I was. But the question that kept coming up over and over, as you said, is, do you really want to put in the work? Do you really want to do the things that you need to do? Because for me, and I'll self-admit, for me, it wasn't a matter of just trying to better understand you. I literally needed to know how to be in a relationship at all with anybody ever. Because I had an unhealthy relationship with everyone in my life. And I had to basically be broken down to my foundations and rebuilt up. It's like one of those houses that you look at it and you go, no. And you have to bulldoze the whole thing and build on top of it. That was kind of where I was at. And
every relationship that you had that had been modeled for you had been a power struggle. It wasn't actually a relationship. So that person gets everything they want, or I get everything I want. There's no in between. And I never worked that way. So finding that medium was really, really difficult. Because I don't power struggle. I win. You know this.
Of course. I mean, that's inevitable. The fact is, you're a very strong-willed person. And on your part, you had to absolutely decide if this was work that you were willing to put in. And on my part, I had to really decide if this was work that I was willing to put in. But also, as you said, if I really even wanted it.
But that's the one thing that I'm really proud of myself, even from the beginning. I desperately loved you and wanted to be with you. But I was honest right from the beginning. I said things like, I don't need to be with you. I want to be with you.
Mm-hmm.
Do you even, are you capable? Is this too hard for you? If it is, I will leave you alone. I was very honest from the beginning, and I'm proud of myself for that.
You were. And I respect and I love you for that. And it's formed a model for me. And unfortunately, that really has led to some pros and cons as far as my own sense of self. Because some people might listen to our story and describing where I started and where I'm at. And if they didn't know you and they didn't know me and they didn't know us and they didn't know the efforts that both of us put in, they would go, well, clearly you just basically made him into who you wanted him to be. And what he wants doesn't even matter. But the whole time you gave me an out. You said, you don't have to do this. This is too hard for you, I don't have to be with you in this way. We can be friends, or we can be together in some other way. And I could, like, you could do what you want, but if you say you want this, then you have to follow through on it. And then I had to sort of take a step back and go, well, do I want this? And it turned out, yes, I absolutely do. So to answer your question, it was very much about what I actually wanted as a person, not just as an autistic person, because I see a lot of these videos and I call out a lot of them. And if I could just get on my soapbox for a second.
I mean, the people who just want to delve into their special interests all day, every day, it's not what we're talking about here.
No.
And that's perfectly fine. But that wasn't you because you did that. You had the ability to have, well, you didn't really have the ability to have that life, but it cost to other people you took the ability to have that life. And you were still miserable.
I was miserable. And you know what? If you're the kind of person and you want to invest all of your time in computer games or video games or art or sports or, I don't know, some other special interest, and you have the means to do so while still being gainfully employed or being independently wealthy, or you know, heaven forbid, have a spouse that is fine living their own separate life from you while you spend 8 hours a day, you know, trying to beat the latest level in the latest video game.
That ended up being my last marriage, but that's because I just gave up.
But you loved me too much to not allow me to, you know, put in the work for what I wanted, because you decided what you wanted in a relationship, and I decided that that's what I wanted. And I put in the work, and I wanted to get to where I was at. And, you know, years and years later now, I'm at a place where, and again, I'm taking us back to the beginning when we were talking about that. Years and years later now, I'm at a place now where I believe that I'm in, you know, maintenance mode, I guess we'll say. You know, when you have to do a lifestyle change and you have to work on getting rid of the bad and getting rid of the non-helpful and changing your environment to suit your needs and all the things. I needed to get away from both the physical and the intangible that were keeping me locked in that state where I was miserable, where I was unproductive, where I was, you know, in a toxic place. And I needed to dump it all. And then once all that was done, to the point where I knew that where I was at right now was where I needed to start, then I could start from zero.
Right. So now we're getting into how this factors into your self-esteem thing.
So I was not starting from zero. I was starting from about -50.
Got it.
And once I started from zero, I could go, okay, so everything has been torn down. All the bad is gone. Now I need to prove that I can do the work to keep myself doing the things that I want. Because I've established.
So I'd like to establish this for the listeners, though. Who are you proving it to?
Myself.
Right. Because people could think that you're proving it to me.
No. I'm not proving it to you at all. I'm proving it to me. Mm-hmm. I've internalized at this point that I don't have to prove anything to you. I just have to prove it to myself, because you accept me the way I am, but you also accept yourself the way that you are.
Right.
And that is oftentimes in the past has been congruent. So the work for me now has been, these are all the things that you know now that you need to do. Now you just have to go do them. And so I started a chart, or like a metric, if you will. I call it self-esteem, but it's much more complex than that, which is essentially, how am I keeping to my sense of, this is what I want, this is how I need to act, this is how I need to behave, this is how I need to think. These are things that I don't do. These are things that I must do. These are things that I need to remember to do. These are the things I need to remember not to do. And how close do I fit into the standard that both you and I have worked together to help me build? And that's kind of where I go.
Right. And when he's saying he built himself a metric, a lot of people would be picturing he's keeping track of this in his own mind. No, you literally have an app where you're tracking this. So can you describe a little bit how that's working?
Yes. So I consider it sort of like some people, they start at 100% and they, dock themselves every time they make a mistake. And that applies to whether you're trying to do a test or whether you're trying to achieve a goal. You're achieving it until you aren't, basically. I choose to start from the most common method, which is you're at 0, and every time you maintain that, you build yourself up. So if you want to treat it as a linear scale, 0 is I'm basically back to where I started. I have the information that I need to do, and that I just need to do it. And I guess we could call 10 as being consistently and regularly and over the course of a long time, demonstrating that this is now the way that I'm living my life.
So I have a question for you. And again, this is a live question. I've never asked this before and I don't know the answer. So why then, when you make one mistake, let's say, when you've done a bunch of other stuff, great, but you've done one mistake that upsets me or causes this type of discussion or that causes you to not be perfect, do you go all the way back down to 0 instead of going back by like 1 or 2?
Because, and actually you've identified this for me several times, especially when we have disagreements, because if it's a case of you didn't know that this was a problem and now you do, that's fine. We could encounter a new scenario, or we could encounter a new situation, or we could, do something that I've never seen before from you. Maybe you haven't told me. Maybe it's not something you were even aware of. Mm-hmm. Maybe one day you decided and woke up and you hated the smell of lavender. And I always used like a lavender shampoo or something. Right. And you're like, now I hate that smell. I never want you to use it again. Then I can't be going, oh shoot, the whole time I was using lavender, I was doing terrible things. Right. No, I had no idea.
So you wouldn't feel bad about that?
No, I'd be like, oh my goodness.
Historically, you would have.
Exactly. But you see, you were the one who told me, if I don't set the expectation for you, you are not to blame for not meeting it. Because I asked you, I said, if I'm, out, if I'm at synagogue or I'm out for a walk or something, and you need me for something, and I'm not home when you need me, and I come home, and you go, like a couple of hours ago, this thing happened, I really could have used you home.
Right. I told you cell phones exist.
Right. If for whatever reason that happened, and I wasn't exactly where you were at that moment that you needed me, you said, I'm not going to blame you. Because if I had said, I need you to be home for 2 p.m. to do this, and you weren't home, that's on you. But if at 2 p.m. something happened and I really could have used you, and I messaged you and said, there's something happening, I need you to come home right away, and then I come home right away, I'm not going to be mad at you for saying, well, you weren't home when this thing happened.
Obviously.
Because I didn't set the standard that you needed to be. If I did, then it's to you. So when we have these disagreements that I feel bring me down to 0, it really starts with, well, did you know that this was something that you shouldn't be doing? Then absolutely, you failed. Mm-hmm. Or did you know that this was something you needed to do? Then if you didn't do it, then absolutely you failed.
But does a failure bring you to 0 automatically?
Yes.
Every time?
Yes.
There's no level of failures? They don't have a monetary value? If you forgot at this point to put my coffee powder in my cup, how much would you have to be knocked down for that?
No, the minor things are insignificant. If you ask me...
That's progress for you.
Yes, I know. Because I consider it the big things. If you, if I give you a cup of coffee and you're like, did you put sugar in this? I'm like, oh shoot, I forgot to put sugar. I'm not going to throw myself on the ground because I should have known to put sugar in your coffee. It's okay, you forgot, now go do it, and it's fine. Mm-hmm. You're not going to be upset at me. You're not going to discuss it with me. You're not going to get mad at me. We're not going to fight over it.
Forget stuff like that all the time. I bring salt to the table, go, guys, I forgot to put salt in this or whatever. It's not a big deal.
And then you can escalate that a little bit, where if you ask me, to change the sheets on the bed, and then, did you change the sheets on the bed? No. Okay, you forgot. Okay, so now do it. And then the third time, it's okay, so I already asked you twice to do it. Could you please go do it now? I'm going to feel a little bad. I'm going to be like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I'm not thinking clearly today. I'm going to go do it right now, and then it's done.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to come back and say, you should know that when I ask you and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That's not how that works. So it's going to be like a little bit of, I got to be more aware of what you ask. But the big things, the things that I do that I know I can't do, or just like picking fights with you, or like going a week without asking you how you're doing, or like the really big things,
Mm-hmm.
it's not like I didn't know. It's like it's clear that I knew. And you're right. It was very significant for me to be able to differentiate between I should be doing this, but I didn't, and now I can, or I should have known that this was something you wanted, but now I do, and it's fine. And you did this thing, and it was just like I can't believe you did this thing. I can't believe you didn't do this thing. I can't believe that I don't matter, or that you didn't think, like, I don't know, some things we talked about that I can't do because it distracts me, or some things that you've talked to me about that are important to you.
Mm-hmm.
I should know better. It's one of those, like we talked about when we did the list of topics that we were going to talk about one day. We talked about the danger of you should know.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of those are very much,
but I agree with that wholeheartedly, except for even for an autistic with ADHD. Once somebody has expressed something to you 10 or 20 times, you should know. There's a difference between you should come out of the box knowing things, and we've had in-depth discussions about this 10 times, and I've told you how I feel about it, and I've even cried and I got emotional.
Right.
Then there's I think a little bit of an entitlement to a you should know there.
Right. And I believe that we need to establish that the you should know thing is, it has its merits, because when you've been in a relationship for the several years now that we have, to the extent that we have been, and we've established right away that there are like ground rules, then it becomes a lot easier for me to feel bad about myself when I don't do the things that I absolutely should be doing.
That doesn't sound positive.
It's positive in the sense
that's the thing. When you revealed to me what you were doing, I actually had concerns, because it sounded like emotionally or maybe mentally not necessarily the most positive of things. But I understand why you're doing it.
Right. Because it's actually a very positive thing, because when we were in the initial stages of our relationship and I genuinely struggled with the very basics, and I pushed and I pulled, and it was a whole thing about me trying to reconcile how I felt versus what was like actually normal. I hate that word, but there it is. It was very easy for me to be down on myself because I had failed, but I didn't know how or why.
Mm-hmm.
And I talk a lot about knowing the why of things, and knowing it and internalizing it are different things too. Because if you don't know the why, even the most basic of whys, then you're already, the battle's lost. If you know the why, but you haven't internalized it, it doesn't matter enough to you to make it a thing, then the battle is already lost too. Because I understand why you want this, or I understand that you want it rather, but I don't know why it's important. And the question or the answer should be, it's important because it's important to me and I'm important to you, so it should be important to you too. And that is the very nature of the relationship. And certain things are going to be different in terms of importance to different couples.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not to say that I haven't adjusted my way of thinking for you specifically, because I absolutely have. And there are other couples out there that don't prioritize the things that you prioritize. And they don't care about the things that maybe you care about.
Or we've described so many of them. And that's fine for them.
And that's great.
One, where the neurotypical only accommodates and they don't ever get anything back and they seem to be okay with it. Or where the autistic person will just take on all the traits of the person that they're with in order to make
Right.
the couple work.
And that was actually a developmental stage for our relationship too, where I decided that in order for me to be the best partner that I could be to you, I would just shadow you and mirror you all the time.
Right. Except for it became a little ridiculous when, I don't know if I've ever discussed this before, but I've had surgery on my stomach and I can't eat very much. And when you decided that you only wanted to eat as much as I did and I had concern for your literal health, it started to become obvious that it wasn't going to work for everything.
Right. And it was very simple and it was very basic, and it should be very clear to the regular person. When you're hungry, you eat. If it's a problem, do something about it. If it's not, eat as much as you feel like you need to eat. Similar to if you were, let's say, a professional jogger. And I was like, I'm going to go jogging with you every morning. We're going to jog 5K every morning. And you were like, you don't jog, so you don't have to do this. This is something that I do because I want to and I can, and it's important to me. But it doesn't have to be important to you.
Yeah. It wasn't even physically reasonable. So when you started to want to shadow me to that extent, that had to be a talk.
Right. Because it was not physically reasonable because our metabolisms are different and our
body chemistry, body makeup and whatever.
Yeah, and that's neither here nor there. Because now, sitting before you, I eat as much as I want, and sometimes way too much, but that's on me.
And you're in really good physical shape.
And I'm in good physical shape.
Well, except for the lung thing.
Yeah, I mean, whatever. My voice is changing and not in the good way. But, and that sort of branched out to, this is what I want to do. If you don't want to do it, is it okay if I still do it? So, in trying to be a better partner to you, I discovered, and again, this is why I had to struggle so much to be a good partner at all. I discovered that if we have different interests, it doesn't mean that you value me less. Because if we're not the same in every conceivable way, you still care about me, even if you don't care about the things that I care about.
That's true.
Because for the longest time, and this goes back to the beginning of the episode today as well, I believe that if I didn't share the interests of the people that I was with, then they didn't value me. And if my interests didn't have the same importance to the people around me, then they weren't valid interests. And that was a problem.
Yeah, that's where you hear a lot of times, when somebody's dating and they say, yeah, he was nice or whatever, we had a good time, but we didn't have much in common.
Right.
We have a lot in common. You and I share a lot of interests. There's no shortage of things that we can do together. So it's perfectly okay if you have 5 or 6 things that you like to do and I don't. And likewise.
Right. Because if I'm engaging in an activity that I enjoy, that I want to do, that make me feel good, and you're either not interested in it at all or not interested in it to the extent that I am, then it doesn't mean that that activity has less value overall.
Right. We have plenty in common when, that sort of thing happens. Like we're both adventurous and we like to travel and we like comedy and we like to laugh and we can talk and talk and talk and talk for hours. And, we have the interest of the kids in common. Like we have a lot in common. So if you want to go to shul for some obscure thing that I've never heard of and I don't particularly feel like it, it's not a big deal.
Right. And that has everything to do with the Israel thing. And basically my entire life was, I want to do this. That thing doesn't interest me. Okay, I don't want to do it anymore. And I gave in too much to that, to the point where I talked about moving to Israel for decades, and I never did it because everyone I told was like, that doesn't interest me. And then instead of going, well, you know what? It interests me and I'm going to do it. I went, well, if it doesn't interest you, it's probably not important. And then I moved on. But we had to dig down, which took us a few years, where we had to figure out, when I said to you, I want to do this, you had to ask yourself, is this also important to me?
Yep. I think moving to Israel was probably the first thing that really passed or had to pass through the flowchart I was describing.
For sure.
And it went all the way from, am I willing to, can we, is this doable, to, okay, so when we do this, it's not going to be one of your things where we get there and you want to do something else.
Right.
And all of those were deal breakers, because when you make a decision like literally moving across the world to a completely different country, completely different society, completely different language, completely different everything. It's not lightly. So each one of the things in that flowchart was a deal breaker for Israel, and it still passed. So, I mean, I think that's why we have that flowchart now. It works.
It does work, and it really depends based on the degree of changes that need to happen to make that possible. Because, you know, from let's try different food right up until let's move to the opposite side of the world.
But again, it has to do with what's important to you, because many people in my life told me don't do it. And if that was important to me, it might not have passed, but it wasn't, because I don't really
Right.
let other people tell me what to do so much. People are still saying, are you going to move home? We're here for almost a year now, and we're doing really well.
Yeah, this is our home, and for good or for bad, we're building a life here. But my self-esteem, my ability to believe that I am a worthwhile person, is based very strongly on my ability to stay close to my values. And that's the other side of the metric. It's not just how much I am the partner that you want me to be. It's also how true I am to my own sense of values, because when we're not fighting, which fortunately is not a lot, not that we're not fighting, that's not a lot, but we don't fight a lot is what I'm trying to say. I do move the chart up and down periodically just based on things that happen in my own, way of thinking, where I'll engage in a behavior that I don't feel necessarily matches where I am, where I'll slide back into something that maybe I thought before, and I'll go, no, that's not where you want to be, is it? And we'll sort of, because I'm always trying to assess my own ability to continue being the person that I want to be.
And I know that Moshe gives me a lot of credit, for a lot of his development, but I would like to point out again for the 100th time that I had nothing to do with this. I didn't even know about it.
No, this has nothing to do with you. This is strictly a way that I gauge my ability to stay close to my own personal values. Because if I engage in a behavior, that behavior better be in line with what I want to do. And if it's not, then there's a problem. If I can nerd out for just a little bit, when you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, there's the sense of being in an alignment. And if you do actions that are out of that alignment, there are going to be consequences.
Yeah, there are actual consequences to you in the game.
And I hold myself to a standard of alignment, where if I engage in a behavior or an action that is out of sync with where I see myself, then it's going to cause a hit to my sense of self, because I am behaving in a way that is not conducive to my own sense of values. And I had to build them basically from scratch. What are some things that I value? What are some things that I need? What are some things that I do to make myself happy? And more times than not, it involves being a good person, being honest, being hardworking, not engaging in unproductive activities, and doing things that actually, I don't know, to use the catchphrase, elicit joy, not just in myself, but in my family. Because if you waste your time playing a video game, or you end up, I don't know, doing something else that is not conducive to the life that we're building, then you have to ask yourself, did you mean to do that? Is that what you're trying to achieve? Like, does this achieve the goal that you're trying to achieve? Or are you doing something that is counterproductive to your own ability to operate within the guidelines that you yourself, Moshe, set out?
That in of itself is interesting, because I think it is a thing that children do. They'll waste time and whatever, just out of, honestly, laziness. I can't think of a different word for it. But it's not something that an adult will do necessarily. So when you find yourself doing a behavior that's not in line with what you want or what you've set out for yourself or the rules that you've put in place, why do you think that is even? Because it's not something I would do. I wouldn't say like, I want to budget and then go, I don't know, buy a fur coat or something.
I guess because part of being autistic and having ADHD and having these developmental delays is a general lack of impulse control and a lack of filter. what seems absolutely normal and natural and easy to certain people is less easy to me.
But that's my confusion. It starts even right there. If I don't want something, I don't even get the impulse to do it. So there's no impulse to control. So where does that come from necessarily?
It comes from id. It comes from a ingrained desire to be counterintuitive to one's own sense of rational right and wrong. It's a bit of a controversial subject, but I mean, I've been autistic my whole life, as far as I know, diagnosed or not, and diagnosed autistics and even undiagnosed autistics are naturally very narcissistic, selfish, and driven by their own impulses and hyperfocuses. And if I were the kind of person that was obsessed, for example, with, I don't know, insects, and I spent 2.5 hours talking to you about insects, and when you wanted to talk about something else, I was like, you're not being fair to me because this is what's interesting to me and you should care about me, then I am operating out of my sense of values, which are to be a contributing partner, to be a good husband, to be a good father, and to do things that are useful for the family.
But that's understandable in both directions. I understand that. But what I'm trying to get at, or maybe it's not even a process that happens for you, is when I've decided I don't want something, I don't even get the impulse. The impulse is like, ooh, no, why would I want that? Because I don't want it. So there's no control, like I don't get to step 2 where there's a control mechanism involved or where I've done it and then I have to backtrack or whatever.
Because sometimes things are a little bit difficult for me. For example, I don't play video games anymore because it's an area where I end up losing myself. But I watch a lot of YouTube shorts that have to do with video games. And sometimes I catch myself and I bring myself down a few steps on my self-esteem because I'm doing something that while, it attends to something that's inside my desire to pursue something, it is not productive to who I want to be. It is not only not productive, it is counterintuitive. And it could be argued by certain people in the autistic community, if you want to do it, you shouldn't deny yourself the right to do something that makes you happy. But that's the point. It doesn't make me happy.
But that's the thing. If it made you happy, absolutely.
It doesn't make me happy. It's just, there's a
But I
video
wouldn't
about
even get there.
some video game that I used to like. I wonder what's going on there. Nope, not going to watch that because I don't care about that anymore.
Right. That's where I am. I wouldn't even go there. I'd be like, I've decided I don't care about this anymore. I'm not even going to search it or look at it or watch it.
Because you can reform yourself and your ability to function based on what you know is rational, but you can also admit that there is going to be a part of your body or your part of your mind that is irrational and does things that are counterintuitive. And until that part of my sense of self is eliminated completely, then I will never be at a 10 because I can't. Okay, so.
Do you think that that's attainable?
Yes,
Oh,
I do.
Okay.
I don't know if it's Midrash or Hasidus or whatever, but Jewish thought states that there are 3 kinds of people. People who engage entirely in good deeds, people who engage entirely in wicked deeds, and people who are sort of in the middle. And the majority of people are in the middle. And you want to make it, a lot of people want to make as their goal the desire to engage in so much goodness that you lose the very inclination to do evil. And a lot of people are more there or less there. And the idea that a person can achieve a level of righteousness that is so high that the idea of doing anything even remotely selfish or out of sync with that doesn't even enter their mind.
Mm-hmm.
They never get the inclination to be bad or do something selfish or do something wicked. They are holy to the extent of holy. But most people have instances where they engage in things that they realize either at the time or later on were not useful or helpful for them. And that's why we have holidays like Yom Kippur. Mm-hmm. So we can say, you know what? I did all of these things and I'm sorry. But if you get to a point where you actually never engage in anything that you ever have to be sorry for, then you've sort of reached the highest level, but very few people ever get there.
I don't know that that's reasonable.
But you see, that is kind of where I'm going. But I'm not trying to achieve perfection. I'm trying to achieve perfection as I see it, which is that we would be engaged in a conversation where you would look at me and say, this person did this really horrible thing. You would never do something like that.
I do that all the time.
Right. But you could say you would never do something like that because in your mind, I never would, even though I had in the distant past.
Right.
And I want to get to a place where that is the case for myself as well as for other people, where I would say, that's crazy. Why would anyone do that? Because I would have completely forgotten the fact that I used to do that at some point because it doesn't enter into my mind.
But realistically, for you as a person are much harder on yourself than I think me or the world at large would be, because you never really did anything that was that bad. It's not like you were killing, puppies or anything.
No, heaven forbid.
You just did things that were not in line with what you wanted. And sometimes you made it other people's problem, which was when I had issues with it.
Right.
Like you needed to be there for something, but instead you were on your phone playing a video game. That was when it became clear that that was not okay.
That was a big thing.
But a lot of people will say, oh, the video game thing, it's very, very touchy because especially a lot of autistics are into video games and they use it to calm down. And I get that. But it's not about the game. Like I myself even toy with video games sometimes. It's not about that. If you were distracted away from important things by buttonhole making, I'd have trouble with you making buttonholes. It's not about the thing. It's about the result of it, if that makes sense.
Exactly. Like, the difference between people who have a few drinks and alcoholics.
I mean, we're both, I guess.
Yes. Because, for certain people, you can do certain things, but then you can sort of put it down and walk away from it.
Neither of us has an alcohol problem to speak of. So we have times where we can drink a lot and we have times where we don't drink at all. But there are people in our lives who are alcoholics and shouldn't even have one drink.
And that's perfectly acceptable. And people go, well, you mean never play any video games? Like never? No, because number one, it's not helpful. And number two, I have in the past engaged in activity where I would lose myself in a video game. And I would say, I'm just going to play it for a few minutes. And then a day and a half later, it's like, did you do all those things? Oh, shoot, I completely forgot. And that can't happen.
And I find that unacceptable. But it's not about the video game. Again, if it was buttonhole making or if it was botany or any of those things, I would have a problem with it just for the resulting effect it had on our life. Because your interest shouldn't necessarily be everybody else's problem.
Right. And that is the definition of an addiction, actually, is if it affects your life, your ability to function, the lives of those around you, then it's a problem and you need to stop doing it.
Like cigarettes. Again, I maintain one of the only things I ever was addicted to in my life was cigarettes. And it would be like me saying, you know what, I'm going to have a couple of cigarettes and then it'll be fine. You would look at me and be like, no, you can't.
Right. And that's reasonable. It's reasonable for someone who is addicted.
And then I would smell and I would make the house smell up and it would cost us money and you would worry about my health. And then that would be me making it your problem.
Right.
So you would have the right to have a boundary there.
Exactly. So, we've been talking about this for about an hour and it's really nice that we could come to the decision to do an episode based on this metric that I set for myself and end up having enough material to talk about it for over an hour.
I knew we would.
You're very smart. So I just want to take the remainder of the time that we have left, which is minus 6 minutes, but it doesn't matter, to sort of go through a bit of, I guess, some housekeeping. So the October high holidays in Israel sort of took over our life. And it really did lead to a lack of production on our part. So we'd really like to get back to a place where we can do weekly episodes, even if we have to make them shorter, because it's very important for the health of the podcast and for all of our thousands of listeners to have a regular schedule that they know on this day or that day that we're going to come up with a new episode generally. And that's something I would like to achieve as a personal goal for myself. We had a really interesting interview with Rabbi Simcha Weinstein a couple of weeks ago that is clearly going to turn into a multi-part series. We're trying to coordinate with him a time to record the next step of that. You might have seen on our social media that we have a really interesting episode coming up on the 17th of November, which is in a couple weeks, with Dr. Temple Grandin, who is, I mean, for lack of...
I can't even believe she's willing to talk to us.
I can't even start. She's a hero of ours. She's written a lot of books. You can look her up on any number of things. We're going to talk to her about smart kids and, how they view the world, parenting tips and tricks for us. We'll see if we can get Avram to come on for a bit, or at least introduce him to Dr. Grandin, because she's really looking forward to meeting him. We're going to try and get some other guests lined up eventually. We still have some amazing sponsors with Munchables, Munchables.ca. Arc Therapeutics is still a wonderful sponsor of ours, and the coupon code NowYouKnow10 for 10% off of your order is still working. It's still functioning. I actually got a message on our Facebook a week or so ago from someone who used the NowYouKnow10 code to make an order with Arc Therapeutic, and they were very happy with what they got. So thanks again for them. Absolutely keep listening, keep following, keep subscribing so you know when we come up with new episodes, and help us to get to a place where we can be one of the top neurodiversity-related podcasts out there. We're on nowyouKnowOneAutistic.podbean.com. Thank you to Podbean. I don't thank Podbean enough for hosting us at this time. We have our show is on Apple Music. It's on Spotify. It's on Podcast Addict. It's on all the apps that you would normally use to check us out. Last I checked, I think we're almost at 8,000 downloads. So
That's amazing. We started as a little baby. We were excited when we had 11 downloads.
So keep downloading, keep listening, refer your friends, refer your coworkers, refer your neighbors, refer your neighbors, refer your anyone. Listen to us as you work, listen to us as you go to sleep, listen to us on your commute, and keep tuning in. And thank you for listening. We'll talk to you again soon.
Well, that's the end of our episode, and now you know One Autistic just a little bit better. Now, something you may not know about some autistics is that we often struggle with ending social interactions. So, Leah?
It's okay, Moshe. I'll take care of it. Thank you for listening to Now You Know One Autistic. See you next week.